You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we found out yesterday that Maurene Comey was fired from the Department of Justice from the Southern District of New York. There was no explanation given yesterday when she was fired. She was the prosecutor that worked on the Jeffrey Epstein-Ghislaine Maxwell case. Today, she came out with a letter to her colleagues that I'm going to put right here on the screen. Yesterday was unexpectedly my last day in the office. I was summarily fired via memo from Maine Justice that did not give a reason for my termination. Every person lucky enough to work in this office constantly hears 4 words to describe our ethos: without fear or favor. Do the right thing the right way for the right reasons without fear of retribution and without favor to the powerful. For the majority of my nearly 10 years in SDNY, fear was never really conceivable. We don't fear bad press. We have the luxury of exceptional security keeping us physically safe, and so long as we did our work with integrity, we would get to keep serving the public in this office. Our focus was really on acting without favor. That is, making sure people with access, money, and power were not treated differently than anybody else, and making sure this office remained separate from politics and focused only on the facts and the law. But we have entered a new phase where without fear may be the challenge. If a career prosecutor can be fired without reason, fear may seep into the decisions of those who remain. Do not let that happen. Fear is the tool of a tyrant, wielded to suppress independent thought. Instead of fear, let this moment fuel the fire that already burns at the heart of this place. A fire of righteous indignation at abuses of power, of commitment to seek justice for victims, of dedication to truth above all else. It has been an honor to fight for those principles by your side. So first and foremost, Glenn, is there anything that we can glean from this letter that might suggest why she was fired?
You know, not why, beyond this was a political move. This was yet another wrongful termination by Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, you know, trying to get rid of anybody who is either a perceived enemy of Donald Trump's or somebody who worked on cases with which Donald Trump now disagrees, or maybe somebody who poses some kind of a danger moving forward to Donald Trump. And we can talk about how that might be in a minute. But beyond this being yet another political wrongful termination of an extraordinarily, universally, highly regarded federal prosecutor, and, you know, I know this because some of the folks that I know worked with her, and they could not speak more highly of her work ethic, of her skills as a prosecutor, and her dedication to equal justice and making sure everything she does is honest and ethical. Brian, you do not get selected to handle the most high-profile, sensitive prosecutions like Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Sean Diddy Combs, unless you are a proven, you know, expert federal prosecutor. And she was obviously terminated for political reasons. Now, what those political reasons might be, we can certainly talk about the probabilities, because, Brian, right now it's clear Donald Trump is worried and he is floundering, right? All of his desperate attempts to distract from the Jeffrey Epstein debacle. I mean, it's gotten so bad that many of his supporters, some of his hardcore MAGA base, has turned on him, and in return, he's turned on them. He's called them weaklings. We know that, you know, hard right-wing social media influencers have turned on him. We know that congressional Republicans have broken from Trump, including MAGA Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who has said, listen, we need more transparency. We need the Epstein files to be released. Donald Trump is floundering and he's in trouble. So one of the things that comes to mind with him now firing Maurene Comey, who I'm sure most people know is the daughter of one of Donald Trump's sworn enemies, former FBI Director James Comey, it feels like maybe he's going to look for a way to blame Maurene Comey, who was the prosecutor of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, for what? Coming up with a hoax, with a witch hunt. You know, that dog won't hunt. Perhaps with some of his most gullible supporters it will, but generally that dog won't hunt, because remember, it was the Trump administration who indicted Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. So I think Trump would be hard-pressed to say that his DOJ indicted somebody, you know, which was nothing more than a hoax or a witch hunt. And his DOJ in 2020 indicted Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. So this may be something where Donald Trump is looking for a fall guy or a fall gal. So when the shit hits the fan, because it feels like it's about to hit the fan, inevitably, it seems like information about Jeffrey Epstein's files and potentially his client list will somehow become public. Maybe he's going to try to push responsibility onto the now fired prosecutor, Maurene Comey. But again, I don't think that will be a persuasive argument for anybody.
I think you're exactly right. I think he's setting the stage to do exactly that, laying the groundwork to be able to do exactly that. He and the Republican Party need boogeymen, and they have relied on this strategy for years and years and years. That's why they point to Hillary Clinton and George Soros and whoever else they can, Hunter Biden, whoever else they can pin the blame on for all of the world's problems. And so in this situation, recognizing that this is an issue that they themselves have staked so much of their credibility on. Remember, Dan Bongino's out there calling for the release of the Epstein files. Kash Patel's out there calling for the release of the Epstein files. Alina Habba, Pam Bondi, Donald Trump himself, Don Jr., all of these people are on record. And so it's not just as easy as being able to say, oh, we can't release them anymore. Now they need to be able to say, oh, there's some reason that we can't release them. And of course, the brain dead excuse that they've come up with is that, okay, fine, I know that we said that they didn't exist and the case was closed, but in fact they do exist, and it's just a completely fake file that was authored by the deep state federal government, even though the deep state federal government, when Jeffrey Epstein died, was Donald Trump and his own government, because this happened in 2019. But that little detail notwithstanding, clearly having somebody with the same last name as James Comey serves as the perfect fall guy, to your exact point, for what they're seeking to do. I think it's worth asking here, because they're setting her up, there was no there. She even said that she was summarily fired without any she alluded to the fact that there was no cause. And so in that instance, what recourse does she have?
Oh, she has recourse. This feels like a wrongful termination, and so she can go to the Merit Systems Protection Board. There are procedures in place to guard against these sort of political revenge firings without cause. Of course, the problem is everything in the executive branch is now under the control of Donald Trump and his flunkies, his lapdogs, and his sycophants. So, basically they're going to grind everything to a halt that could serve to protect the federal workforce. So, she may ultimately land in court if she decides to bring a suit against the Trump administration, as has, for example, the wrongfully terminated pardon attorney, Liz Oyer. She's battling her wrongful termination in court as we speak. So Maurene Comey, will have to decide whether that is the right approach for her. But let me talk about something else, because you may say, well, the tactical wisdom of firing the person at the Department of Justice who probably knows more about the Epstein files and the client list than anybody else at the Department of Justice sounds like a really bad tactical move, because can't she just now spill all the beans, just disclose everything that Trump and Bondi are trying so desperately to bury? And the answer is perhaps not as satisfying as you would like it to be. Even though she's now been fired from her position at the Department of Justice, she is still bound by the secrecy rules that we all operate under as federal prosecutors. There's this thing called 6E, that's the federal rule, grand jury secrecy. And what it provides is that when we're investigating cases, Brian, and we are issuing subpoenas, and witnesses appear pursuant to those subpoenas, or documents and other evidence is obtained pursuant to those subpoenas, all of that is grand jury protected secret information that, frankly, we could lose our law license if we ever disclosed publicly. And that survives our firing, our retirement, our decision to leave the Department of Justice. So even though it feels like Maurene Comey could spill the beans, I am pretty confident she will continue to take her ethical obligations deadly seriously, and she won't spill the beans. Now, let me just give our viewers the exception to that rule that she really can't talk about what she knows. If she has information that came to her that was not a product of grand jury subpoenas, people came in, for example, for voluntary interviews, which happens all the time, well, that's not necessarily 6E protected information, so potentially she could share that. Of course, she could be called to Congress to testify, perhaps unlikely in the days of, MAGA Mike Johnson and the Republicans being in control of the House. But, there are still some ways that some information might be able to be provided sort of lawfully and ethically by Maurene Comey.
Yeah, but I guess, look, if she does reveal information that isn't protected, and this DOJ decides that it's going to go after her anyway, I mean, aren't the laws that protect these people only valid insofar as the Department of Justice wants to enforce them as they're written? And so if you have the DOJ that's just going to pretend as if she did something wrong and mire her in legal issues as if she did something wrong, then it's basically the same as if she had done something wrong. She's going to have to deal with an investigation and a prosecution. It's going to cost her money. It's going to cost her reputational status. And so couldn't the DOJ act in such a way where their abuses could actually have the same impact as if she'd done something illegal if she didn't?
Yes. I mean, anybody who has to contend with a revenge-fueled, vindictive prosecution will suffer mightily. They may, suffer reputationally. They may suffer financially. They're going to have to hire lawyers. They're going to have to defend against baseless charges. The only good news is the rule of law is still king in court. So, I always go back to this, Brian, when we talk about how, can't Donald Trump just prosecute all of his enemies? Well, yeah. He has been pledging to prosecute his enemies for a very long time now. And it's a long laundry list. We're all familiar with it by now. It's, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and Letitia James and Alvin Bragg and Jack Smith and James Comey and John Brennan and Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs and now maybe Maurene Comey. And it goes on and on and on and on. But, Brian, not a single one of these people has ever been indicted with a single crime, even though Donald Trump has been screaming off with their heads for so long now. Why? Because in a court of law, the rule of law is still king. And so it's little consolation, but, I don't think that's going to change. I still am not suspecting to see mass prosecutions of Donald Trump's perceived enemies. Why? Because they didn't commit crimes.
Perfectly put. We'll leave it there. For those who are watching right now, this is obviously not the last that we'll hear from this whole Epstein saga. So if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. It's the best way to support our work. Doesn't cost you anything. And it's also a great way to support independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.